happy to participate.
Yeah, but you mean to senescence panel tomorrow, I believe.
Yeah, very appropriately so. Well, gosh, very exciting. And probably the most incredible thing that's happened is that we've gotten Dr. Ken Dychtwald to give our keynote talk, and it's early on for Ken. He is out on the West Coast, but he is founder and CEO of AgeWave, and a real expert, founder of the field really, in age-related concerns, and just a very dynamic and creative person. It's a real privilege to have him. So Ken, take it away. We are so glad to have you.
Thanks, Ann. It's so good to be here with you and everyone today. And you're going to be hearing some unbelievably interesting presentations over the next several days from physicians, bioscientists, researchers, solvers of all sorts. And what I'm going to try to do during my little time with you this morning is to create kind of a different way of looking at all this than maybe the one you currently think of. So let's jump right into it. First of all, we have for quite a long time now been searching for a fountain of health. The basis of Taoism was not only something having to do with consciousness and enlightenment, but it was also about immortality. How do we live the longest life possible? And then the alchemists came along centuries ago, and they were trying to rid the body of its impurities. We've heard a lot about the earlier explorers, but have you considered that many of these explorers were sent around the world not in search of real estate, but because their emperor or queen or king was falling ill or falling old, and heard that there was a magical fountain or a fountain of youth or a crystal somewhere in the world that they should go bring back to bestow upon their ruler a kind of an immortality. Well, these pursuits really didn't lead to much of anything other than a revised geopolitic, but it was the early 20th century with the emergence of public health departments. And all of a sudden, when doctors started washing their hands and we started cleaning our streets, that some of the illnesses that used to take people down disappeared. And then in the 1920s and 30s, the arrival of antibiotics, penicillin available, the diseases would have taken our grandparents down, we could get a shot for and be fine. And not only be fine, but as a result, live longer lives than people ever had before. Now, some of you may not know what this is a picture of. This is a ward filled with iron lungs. And in those containers were people with poliomyelitis. They spent their entire life in that container and dealt with the world through a mirror, a reverse mirror over their head. Now, back in the 1940s, some folks said, oh my goodness, we're going to need more and more iron lungs in the future. That will be a big part of our medical system. But then came along Jonah Salk, who I was fortunate enough to do a book with when I was 30. Jonah Salk and then Sabin, who said, no, we don't want more iron lungs. We got to end the disease. And in 1953, we saw an end to polio almost entirely. But for the most part, polio was relegated to being a disease of the past. Now, this pathway to the fountain of health was not always a straight line. The 1950s and 1960s, as marketing for cigarettes went full bore, it was often doctors that were used in the ads. Here's one that says, more doctors smoke Camels. And that was the selling point. The Camel cigarettes were the preferred cigarette of your physician. Now, it took a few years and then a few decades before we realized the carcinogenic impact of cigarettes and the fact that doctors should not have been promoting them. So it is with much of medicine. We make a few steps forward, we go sideways or backwards from time to time. Late 20th century, we saw the arrival, powerful self-care movement, where we began to understand and study the impacts of diet, nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management. And then, of course, the extraordinary cracking of the genetic code. And in a few moments, I'll tell you where I think that's going to be taking us in the coming years. Simultaneously, an extraordinary pharmacopoeia emerged, so that my dad, for example, had a doctor who prescribed him medications for his diabetes and his macular degeneration, and for a while for his bladder cancer, which was treated and cured. But my dad, through his medicines, was kept alive for decades and got to know my children, his grandchildren, thanks to those medications. Coronavirus, for all its horrors and all its terribleness, created another dimension to medicine and to the search for the fountain of health, which was speed. All of a sudden, speed became a factor more than ever before. How do we get to the finish line faster? And that's not going to go away. There's now the belief that if we can take bioscience and put it on the track with infoscience, it becomes subject to Moore's law, double its power every 18 to 24 months at half the cost. So all of a sudden now, the speed of science is moving onto a track that we've never witnessed before. Look with me at this chart from the year 1000 to 2020. The average life expectancy, this is the United States, vaulted from 25 to 78.5. And in fact, in the 20th century alone, over 30 years were added to the average life expectancy. Now, there were always some older people, but not many. And so we didn't need to create our modern medicine to deal with the diseases of elders because there were so few. We didn't need to create our housing to be concerned with the steps and the walkways of older adults because there were so few. The average couple didn't say in the 1850s, gee, honey, what are we going to do in our retirement years? Because you weren't going to be living that long. But the breakthroughs in the last century have created a longevity that we've never seen before. I do want to point out that that longevity in the United States and other countries around the world has backtracked during COVID to about 77 in the United States. But there's great hope that it'll continue moving forward in the decades to come. In fact, I sit on various boards and panels with geroscientists, and I'm increasingly hearing that because of breakthroughs that are 10 or 20 years away, living to 110 or 120 or more may become commonplace. Now, let me take you sideways for a second. You might think, oh, all those old people, we're not particularly fond of old people. Let me take you back to the 1780s. In this picture, when the United States signed its Constitution, what do you notice about these people other than they were all men? They were wearing white wigs or had powdered their hair white. Why? They were not trying to look young. They were trying to look like elders. Why? Because it was believed that older people had more wisdom. It was believed, without a germ theory of disease, that if you lived a longer life, God had selected you. Also, from a fairly basic point of view, the older people owned the land. We were agrarian. And so if you were 25 and you wanted a couple of acres, it was grandpa and grandma that were going to decide what you were going to get. So you better show them some respect. You added it all up and people wanted to look and feel and act older. Now that's flipped in the 20th century with the Industrial Revolution. And we are coming out of a century with a youth obsession right now. But we've gone back and forth on this over the centuries and throughout the world. But let me back up even further and look at the average life expectancy over the past 100,000 years. And what medical anthropologists now tell us is that throughout 99% of human history, the average life expectancy at birth was under 18. And so longevity is the new frontier, and we are the pathfinders. In fact, 2/3 of all the people who have ever lived past 65 in the entire history of the world are alive today. But we've not reached the end of this longevity revolution. Many of us think we're really at the beginnings of a surge. Now, sometimes people say to me, oh, you know, tech is going to keep evolving and the future is all about cool tech, kind of like the Jetsons, young people with cool technology. Well, that may or may not be the future. And yeah, I like tech too. But I'm going to show you a picture of what the actual future is going to look like if you're ready. Here it comes. When this picture was taken, and I saw it a few years ago, this young lad in the middle was 3. That's Bradley. Sitting next to Bradley is his mom, Christina. She's 27. Up behind them is the grandmother, who's 49, Kathy. Next to her is the great-grandfather, who's 73, Bob. Across from him is the great-great-grandmother. She's 95. And yep, that's the great-great-great-grandmother, 118, Sarah Knaus. a 6th-generation society. That's the future. Occasionally, when I see in the media or politicians, or maybe even some of you, talk about the balance between young and old, I feel like that's very mid-20th century. Young and old are just two of a wider mosaic of what we're seeing emerging. With greater longevity, we have 5 generations at work right now, and we're a 6th-generation society. Another interesting point, old age. Most of us have got the number in our head, oh, that's when people turn 65. Well, that number was picked by Otto von Bismarck way back in the 1880s in Europe, when the life expectancy was only 45. So first, Bismarck was a very clever actuary. And second, why is it that we're still using a number from almost a century and a half ago that's obsolete? So I had an experience about 2 decades ago. I knew John Glenn, and I was asked by CNN to do some commentary when he announced he was going up into space. And I watched his early interviews, and he turned to the young reporters who were kind of whacking on him. You know, why are you going into space? Shouldn't you be puttering around the house? Aren't you too old for this? And he turned to these young reporters and he said, hey, just because I'll be 77 doesn't mean I still don't have dreams. And I thought, wow, I think we've always thought that young people had hopes and dreams. And then you get older, you either fulfill them or you don't, but you're not going to have new ones. What Glenn was saying was something quite different. And then recently I coined, let's call it the Betty White effect. Here's Betty White at 99 before she passed away. And all of a sudden, everybody in the world was saying, wait a minute, is that what 99 could look like? Wow. She's beautiful. She's funny. She's had a career with lots and lots of layers to it. I wouldn't mind being that version of 99. And it reminded me of the mid-20th century when Roger Bannister, himself a young medical student, broke the 4-minute mile when scientists had believed it was simply not possible. But within months after Bannister's breakthrough race, everybody started running faster. That 4-minute mile event by Bannister set everybody's bodies on a different path. And before you knew it, thousands of people were getting set to break 4-minute miles. So the question is, what's possible? Do we even know? Here's an example. Yeah, when you see a person in their mid-80s doing things that you didn't know if teenagers could do, it's a little bit like Roger Bannister. You stop and think, wait a minute, maybe we've got our expectations needing an adjustment. Now, on top of what I've just covered, this longevity revolution, there's another demographic force at play. After World War II, many of the developed nations around the world, even the lesser developed nations, had a baby boom. Here in the United States, 76 million kids were born between 1946 and 1964. It was a surge. And it not only created a demographic surge, it created a marketplace surge. When that generation got a little bit older, the women of that generation demonstrated how unique and different they were from previous generations of women. So some of you watching this may be baby boomer women, or you might have a mom who's a baby boomer mom. This generation of women were the most likely to attend college and veer away from traditional women's roles than any generation that had ever come before them. This generation of women that also changed the healthcare system. Not enough attention is given in the late 60s and early 70s to the Boston Women's Health Collective. It was not a group of doctors. It was not a group of bioscientists. It was a group of activist women who decided that women should understand how their bodies work and learn how to take better care of themselves. What they pioneered led to the wellness movement, the self-care movement, the holistic health field, led to many of the things that you do in your own personal life and some of the changes that are coming that I'll be mentioning in a few moments. I also want to mention something else about these women. Not only are they still living within a wage gap, 82 cents on a dollar, which is both unjust and not appropriate for a modern age, but they have had a surge in their earnings relative to men who have not had such a surge. But I want to turn my attention and your attention, not just to this income growth, but to what I'll call an influence growth. What you're seeing is more and more 50, and 60, and 70, and 80-year-old women who are powerful, who are smart, who are not looking to be young, who want to own their lives and own their legacies and own their wisdom, and they're not looking for any marketers to tell them they can't be who they are. If you look at this from a demographic numbers point of view, if you go back to the 1950s and look at each of the demographic segments, you see that the 1950s would have been a great time to be in the baby food business, would have been a great time to be building children's schools, and it probably would have been a great time to become a pediatric doctor. But look where we're going now. When you look at the years 2020 to 2040, the growth in our culture, in demography, is not going to come from young people. It's not barely coming from middle-aged people. The growth is going to be older people. And so what older people like to eat and what older people like to wear and the kind of houses they're going to need to live in and dealing with social isolation of retirees, these are going to be issues that you're going to hear more and more about. And the diseases of older people, the illnesses, the problems, the struggles are going to become more and more front and center. If you're wondering, and I know we've got people from all over the world in this session, what's happening worldwide? Here's a map of the world. If you look at Italy, for example, and Japan, you see that those are countries that are older, combination of low fertility and high longevity. But I'm going to click this device in my hand and show you the world in 2050. Right. So this age wave is international. And so the topics we're here to discuss in this meeting on meta health, metabesity, are ones that are going to be growing and multiplying for the decades to come for the rest of our lives. It's another point we need to appreciate, that while the marketplace has, since World War II, been dominated by a focus on youth, turns out young people currently are close to broke, but their parents and grandparents have most of the money. And they came out of COVID with a higher concentration of the total net worth than going in, because young people have really had the wind knocked out of them. They've lost their jobs. Losing their jobs, in some countries, they've lost their medical insurance. They've been struggling with raising their kids and trying to maintain their families. Older adults have got more safety nets. And while, yes, there is some poverty and disability and frailty among the older population, overall, the 50-plus population has become a power segment of our consumer base. Not only are they 35% of the population and growing, but they buy 51% of all food and groceries. And so watch food and grocery manufacturers start to scratch their head and say, hey, what do 62-year-olds want to eat in the afternoon? And what kind of foods do they need to stay healthy? 52% of all personal care products, 55% of physical therapy sessions, and that's going to grow. 57% of all health club memberships, 63% of all lab tests, 68% of OTC, 74% of vitamins, and 77% of all prescription drugs. We recently did a survey of 10,000 Americans, and we asked, what are your greatest financial worries? We asked retirees, what's their number one worry? Healthcare costs, including long-term care. So not only is health a physical challenge, but it's a financial challenge. There is a health-wealth convergence. Perhaps during COVID, people had a loved one who was in a nursing home, or people had a brother or sister or somebody they had to care for. And they began to realize that healthcare covers certain things or infrastructures like Medicare, but not long-term care. And there's a lot of out-of-pocket costs. In fact, in the United States alone, the average couple's out-of-pocket healthcare and long-term care costs for the rest of their life is $456,000. What about pre-retirees? Maybe they're not worried at all. Wrong. They're more worried. So for physical and financial reasons, we have got to match health span to lifespan. And let me explain what I mean. Take a look at this sampling of countries. Across the top, you see lifespan, average life expectancy. And we know that the biologic potential right now, even without messing with genetic possibilities, is somewhere around 120. So we do okay in the United States. It's gone backwards, but in 2020, it was 78.5. But there are many countries in the world. In fact, there are 33 countries in the world with a higher life expectancy than that in the US. But more concerning to me than most people pay attention to is the fact that our health span is so suboptimal. So we're creating a version of longevity where people, first of all, don't live that long, but second of all, spend 10, 12, 15 years suffering in pain, disabled, losing their minds. We have not created a healthcare intelligence or system to match our health spans or our brain spans to our lifespans. Now, these next 3 slides trouble me, and I hope they trouble you too. This is the global health expenditure per capita. You might say, wow, look at the United States. Look at all the money we spend. We must have great health care. We must have great, healthy people. Look at all, we spend more money than 2, 3, 5 times more than other countries in the world per person. Well, wait a minute. If you look at how we're doing on global life expectancy, doing really badly. So however proud we might be feeling about our healthcare system, we shouldn't be feeling proud. It's like if you had a business that was spending a fortune on some technology or service and it wasn't working, you'd stop and scratch your head and say, hey, what are other people doing? Maybe we need a new healthcare system. This one's not working. And it gets worse. If I show you the global health span, now remember, we spend more money than all these other countries. We do badly. And what we're producing is not healthy longevity, but unhealthy aging with circulatory problems and arthritis of joints and varicosity in our veins and orthopedic impairments. And I could just kind of ruin your day. And by the way, there's another problem to all this. We've created specialized medicine rather than a meta medicine that deals with the challenges of an aging body and mind. We've got all these different specialties in the mouth and the ears and the brain and the knees and the hips. And I can see value in that, making people be excellent at something, but we lose sight of the big picture. Health conditions go up with age. And so as our population ages, we're going to see more and more chronic conditions. Several months ago, I was invited to give the keynote address to a group of about 500 pension managers from all over the world. And they were educated, intelligent, representative, diverse, smart people. And I just, as a lark, asked them this poll: which later life disabling condition scares you the most? This is what they said. 81% of the people said Alzheimer's and dementia. And I'll tell you what, they ought to be frightened by Alzheimer's and dementia, because as we live longer and longer lives, this disease is going to run rampant. This disease is the one we need to stop in its tracks. You can't buy your way around this disease. You know, you could be a billionaire and there's no solution you can buy that other people don't have access to. You know, Bill Gates' dad had Alzheimer's disease when he died. Donald Trump's father had Alzheimer's disease. He doesn't usually mention that, but yeah. And it's 100% incurable and 100% fatal. Now there's some progress going on, and Biogen came out with something that had some effect, but we're really not where we must be. And it's not just somebody who lives over there that gets this disease. It was Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, it was Jimmy Stewart, who everybody loved. It was Rosa Parks, who battled to get her seat on the bus. We didn't pay attention to the fact that she lost her mind. Mort Zuckerman, lawyer, professor, wealthy man, Alzheimer's disease. And my mom, who would have imagined that she, living a healthy life, would spend her last 12 years, many of them living in a crib, wearing a diaper. This is a bad disease. During COVID, a documentary came out about Bill Gates, and there was a tiny little sliver in it where he was asked what he's frightened of.
Bill Gates, what's your favorite animal? Dog. What's your favorite food? Hamburger. What do you eat for breakfast? Nothing. What is your worst fear? I don't want my brain to stop working.
So this is a disease, we spent 100,000 years trying to allow people to live long lives and become increasingly intelligent, and emotional intelligence too, and wisdom evolves. And then we've got this disease that preys on the aging brain, and we do not currently have the proper resources in place to knock it out. And the potential cost of it is devastating to governments, to countries, to families, to individuals. Wipeout. And I thought, well, what does this remind me of? Years ago when Katrina was rolling into the Gulf, we could see it. I mean, we had satellites that allowed us to see this storm coming in, and we weren't quite prepared for it. What does Alzheimer's look like? Is it twice the size of Katrina? No, this is what it looks like. And Alzheimer's could very well become the sinkhole of the 21st century, unless all of us get our media and our political leaders and our government leaders to step forward and end this disease and end the other diseases of aging. So what we've got is this unhealthy aging that I showed you a few minutes ago. We've got to envision healthy longevity. What could that be? What would it be like to live 90 or 100 or 120 years where our health spans matched our lifespans? How long might we work? How might we enjoy time with our great-grandchildren? What contributions might we make to our fields or to society or to our communities? So how do we get there? These are my thoughts. I don't have the level of bioscience intelligence that many of you do, and you're going to hear over the next few days, but here's some of my thoughts. First of all, we got to get our medical system excellent at dealing with older adults. It is not, and nobody is insisting it ought to be. We have 126 medical schools in the United States, only about 12 full departments of geriatrics, and 90% of all the doctors and nurses who graduated out of medical or nursing school last year will not have taken one course in geriatric medicine, not geriatric assessment, not polypharmacy, not to understand the aging brain, not knowing how to diagnose for brain disorders, nothing. We've got more than 55,000 pediatricians in this country, less than 5,000 geriatricians. What are we thinking? What are we thinking? And maybe we've got a screwball economics. We spend far more money making plastic surgeons wealthy and financially secure than geriatric professionals. Have we got that nuts or what? I'll tell you something else. I was writing about aging. I got involved in the field of gerontology when I was 24. I'm now in my early 70s, so I've been in this field for 48 years. So I wrote about Medicare for decades. But then when I passed my 65th birthday, I began to realize I don't get it. I mean, I get a document like this every month. On the upper left, it says, this is your Medicare premium bill. And on the upper right, it says, this is not a bill. Excuse me. I mean, but I'm an English-speaking, PhD, award-winning, written 19 books guy, and I don't understand Medicare. So what's the con going on here? How do we have insurance companies and organizations and media and marketing and advertising promoting something that the average person simply doesn't understand? And why doesn't Medicare include long-term care? Because chronic disease and long-term care is a part of the healthcare puzzle. Second, we need precision wellness and self-care. There's article after article, and I'm on every kind of mailing list. So take this supplement and do this exercise and sleep this way. It's crazy making. For example, you go to the drugstore thinking that maybe you could benefit from a vitamin supplement. Well, guess what? It's organized alphabetically in the store, which is of no use whatsoever. It's not organized based on your need. Maybe like me, I've got hypercholesterolemia. So what should I be taking if I'm inclined to try a supplement? I've got high blood pressure that I manage. I don't know how to find that based on alphabetical organization. But go to Japan, for example. This is the Toto bathroom stool. It's got a biolab built into it. so that the people who live in that home can get readouts each day of what foods they should be eating, or whether they need a little more rest or sleep, or what exercise might be good for them to produce a better biomarker. I think we need a health Waze. You know, we have Waze now, or Google Maps, or there's lots of these technologies built on AI where you can program where you want to go, and it will factor in the weather, the road conditions, the speed of your car, the cost of things, and direct you. Well, I'd like to program an 110-year-old version of a healthy me and have my health Waze tell me, all right, this is the supplement you need to take, or you ought to cut back on your gluten, or maybe you need more plant-based food in your diet, or time to exercise. Why do we leave this for everyone to try to figure it out for themselves, or leave it to individual companies to try to capitalize on people's confusion? Stop. We need to get smarter about self-care. This next one really turns me inside out. We need scientific breakthroughs. The fact that we still have cancer, the fact that we still have strokes, the fact that we still have Alzheimer's, diabetes, Lewy body dementia. It's like, what is up with us that we create diseases for which people take some meds, maybe for years or decades? Some companies do well from that. Some people do a little bit better. But why are we not upping our scientific intelligence in order to eliminate these diseases? This next chart blows my mind. In the US, this is what is spent per person per day. We spend money on defense, we spend money on Medicare, we spend pennies on medical research. This is outrageous. Outrageous. And I've watched every presidential debate for the last 20 years, both sides of the aisle, and watched all the questions being asked from the media. How come nobody asks the question, why aren't we multiplying the level of funding for scientific health-related research by 50, not by a little bit more or a little bit more? Why don't we take it up to what it needs to be, maybe 20 times what we're spending, in order to wipe out the diseases of aging so we don't have to spend a fortune caring for sick people? The other day, somebody said to me, gee, Ken, it's really great that you've gotten on this beat lately. It's like, no, man, I've been on this beat for a long time. Back in 1995 at the White House Conference on Aging, I had a great keynote slot. It was President Clinton, then Vice President Gore, then me. Here's a slice from that.
We've got to fund a great deal of research. Please, I would hope that the future legacy to our children is not 12 million Alzheimer's patients. Although we need palliative and adult daycare, we need enormous amounts of money so that Alzheimer's, so that cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, arthritis, diabetes, osteoporosis will be diseases that have an end to them. This will not happen unless we fund research.
So I've watched every single presidential debate for the last 20 years in the United States. And this is not a partisan issue, what I'm talking about here. It's not Democrat or Republican. It's everybody's got a body. Everybody's got a mom or a dad or a brother or sister or a child who's going to get knocked down and humiliated and demeaned and made to suffer from these diseases. How come we have not had leadership that's stepping forward to end the diseases of aging, to end them, not to fiddle around with them a little bit, but to end them? There are bits of progress taking place, and you'll hear about some of the more interesting of those in the next few days. There's about 35 drugs right now that are coming to the market that claim to have some effect on improving health, strengthening the immune system, reversing the aging process. We'll see. I'm captivated by, after all these years, we've been waiting for breakthroughs from the DNA mapping. CRISPR could very well lead us to a different future as we learn how to write in and write out of our genetic codes cancer or diabetes or heart disease, or maybe Alzheimer's, so that we can live in a future where we have a genetic package that is free of illness. I saw this recently, that scientists have discovered the genetic code that makes jellyfish immortal. They are not limited by the Hayflick limit. And so what if we could splice out of a jellyfish an immortality gene so that we could live at least 120 years healthfully? The breakthroughs may not come from pharmaceuticals. I mean, they may, or they may come from nutraceuticals or electroceuticals. I become captivated by a technology, and there are others too, but this one really caught my attention. Focused ultrasound. Maybe you're aware of it. Maybe you've never heard of it. They call themselves the most powerful sound you'll never hear. How does it work? Multiple intersecting beams of ultrasound are guided within an MRI infrastructure to target illness, whether it's prostate cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, fibroids, and it can target to 1/10 the size of a blood vessel. It can kill and eliminate the diseased tissue and leave all the adjacent tissue untouched. Here's an example. Here's a gentleman with essential tremors. He's awake when the procedure is done. There's no anesthesia, no incisions. By the way, imagine if there were a technology, sort of like Star Trek, that would render surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation a thing of the past. It's obsolete and barbaric. Here's what he looks like after his focused ultrasound treatments. What's another area? I was very excited to see that ARPA-H was set in motion recently. So the idea of a DARPA-like model where we have accelerated, super intelligent people coming together to solve a problem, not just to kind of move it around with a little bit of incremental breakthroughs and small funding, but the idea of breakthrough thinking. I want to add to this because often when we think of health and matching health span and brain span to lifespan, we leave out the behavioral or social dynamics, and I think they're extremely important. Often people talk about, gee, I'd like to be youthful as I age. But from my studies that AgeWave has done and we've been involved with around the world, it seems that being useful, having a purpose, having a role, being a part of younger people's lives, not just sitting back. In the United States over the last decade, the average retiree watched 47 hours of television a week. Now, I can't imagine, that's like a bad Kurt Vonnegut story. The idea is to create long-lived people to watch TV all day. Youthfulness is one thing. Usefulness may be more important. My good friend and colleague, Mark Friedman, who started Encore.org with Linda Fried from the Mailman School of Public Health, says that we're living in an era of age apartheid where we separated out the generations. And maybe that's a social phenomenon that needs to be corrected for all of our benefits. So we did a study a few years ago and we asked people, are you happy? Are you healthy? Do you have a sense of purpose as you age? And we saw that people who don't give or volunteer are doing okay. They got a level of health that's okay, a sense of purpose, not bad. And 52% are happy, not bad. But look at that same question when we ask people who do some volunteering. Not only is giving to others from other backgrounds, different backgrounds and religions or lifestyles than we might have as we're older, different sexual identities, by giving to those who are younger, we get healthier. Not only do they have better lives, but we are better too. In fact, in a recent study, I was delighted to see that 89% of Americans feel that there should be more ways for retirees to use their talents and knowledge for the benefit of their communities and society at large. All right, so let's tie all this together. The time has come for a new era of healthy longevity for everyone. Using improved self-care, building a more intelligent geriatric medicine, doing a meta-health approach, not too many isolated silos, and having massive buildup on our scientific intelligence leading to breakthroughs. We've got to match health span to lifespan, and we've got to match brain span to lifespan. Now, some people say to me, oh, Ken, you're a dreamer. That's too hard. Yeah, well, you know what? It is hard, but so other things are hard too. Abraham Lincoln called for the creation of a transcontinental railroad. That was completed within 7 years. The Panama Canal was championed by Theodore Roosevelt, completed within 10 years. The Manhattan Project, 6 years. Going to the moon, John F. Kennedy, 8 years. And it was a challenge to the public that brought that about. Now, obviously, he was president, so he had great gravitas, but let's watch the little slice of his speech that set that in motion.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
Bill Clinton championed the Genome Project, 10 years. So what do we need now? We collectively, because our political leaders seem to have kind of lost their way with regard to trying to create a healthy future. We collectively have got to create a scientific grand concerto to create healthy longevity, not just for the billionaires, but for everyone. Zan, should we cover a couple of questions before we wind up this session? And thank you,
Oh
everyone.
my gosh, Ken, that was powerful, profound, compelling. We just can't thank you enough. I want to just note, though, that your expression, match health span to lifespan, I think should be our motto. And, you know, I know your age and you look about 20 years younger than that. So what's your secret to that?
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Ken.
Over to mute. My wife and I decided a while ago that we should do the best we can, you know, stuff happens, you know, so you can't guarantee against everything. But for example, I haven't eaten red meat for 35 years and I work out twice a day and I do take some supplements and we have a gluten-free household and try to go very low on sugar and milk. So we try to, you know, as we learn things, we feel that we've also got to walk the walk. And since my wife's mother had Alzheimer's and my mother had Alzheimer's, a lot of the reason we do what we do is because we want to maintain our brain health. But I get pretty angry, you know, and thank you for allowing me to speak at the beginning of this important conference. And I'm loving the new title, Targeting Healthy Longevity, because a lot of people would say to me, what's Metabesity? Is that for overweight people only? And so new name is appropriate for this new time. But we try our best to do what we can, disturbed over the fact that 2/3 of the American public is overweight, 1/3 is obese, disturbed over the fact that the food industry still sells us junk and, you know, gives us face entertainment, knowing that it's going to cause us to have diabetes and carry extra pounds and maybe even have brain troubles as a result. So thank you for your compliment. I don't know, I'd like to feel even better still, and I wish there were some more breakthroughs coming so that I could be the beneficiary.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
You've been watching this space for some time now. I don't know what sort of evolution you've had in your thinking about your own personal aspirations for healthy longevity. Do you mind if I ask you, what are you thinking now? What did you used to think before, and what are you thinking now based on, you know, these learnings?
Well, I want to be honest because this stuff is all captured and maybe viewed beyond my time. I think it's more important that you live well than you live long. So for me, I'm not one of these billionaires who wants to live to 200 or have my head in a code sitting in a box somewhere. I'd like to live long, but have, as Jim Freeze at Stanford once said, a compression of morbidity. So my period of illness or decline, I'd like for it to be very short, maybe 10 minutes or a day or two, but not 12 or 15 years. As I've grown older and watched the field emerge, I get to meet people like you three folks, and I feel encouraged because I feel there's more and more people coming together to try to match health span to lifespan. But on the other hand, I do feel as I grow older that many of these breakthroughs may still be 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years out. And so I feel a sense of urgency that I didn't feel when I was younger. When I was younger and I watch my kids, they feel like, oh, one day there'll be a breakthrough or not. But then when you hit your 72nd birthday, you think like, now. Yeah, I'd like to see a vaccine for Alzheimer's, not $1,000 a day or $56,000 a year. Mildly effective medication. I'd like to see the end of vascular disease. I'd like to see the end of diabetes. And so, you know, I want to challenge all folks listening around the world to think about how do we not just be incremental, but exponential, and how do we have breakthroughs?
Well, Ken, one of the scientists at the forefront of that is Joan Manick right here. And Joan, what do you think?
Well, first, Ken, that was such an inspiring talk. And I think it's so obvious that if we could prevent chronic disease or reverse chronic disease, it's going to decrease healthcare costs. So it's like there's no, it's all win, win, win. And what is it that's holding us back? Because it's such an obvious argument. Why haven't big pharma invested more in chronic disease or in disease prevention? Because payers, if it saves them, costs, they'll pay for it. So what has been the holdup? And is it just that it's been so hard to do? It's easier to target a rare genetic monogenetic disease, and you can win on that, whereas chronic diseases are just tougher.
Well, first of all, let me say that as I was giving my talk, I was watching you two out of the side. The viewers probably can't see that I was watching the three of you, and you smiled a lot when Jana Quas, who's 86, did her parallel bar routine. I think there's 3 or 4 problems. First of all, we have an absence of leadership. We have got leaders, Democrats, Republicans, or whomever, concern themselves with not talking much about aging because they think that people will want them to get their brain scanned, or they'll be questioned about their own age or something. I knew President Obama and been on panels with him, and he didn't talk about it either. For some reason, nobody sat these people down and shaken them saying, this is going to be the sinkhole of the coming century. Sick older people is not a good thing, and we can do something about it. Second, I think that there's a lot of companies that harvest illness, that they make more money when people are sick, and that's unfortunate. And many of them are well-intentioned. Maybe a food company, maybe a home care company, and maybe it's kind of like the iron lung industry. They were making a lot of money. When polio went away, that put them out of business. Third, I think that we haven't put the monies where our mouths are. That you saw the slide, and I saw you nodding, all of you nodding your heads, that when we spend, for Alzheimer's, for every dollar we spend on treating somebody with the disease, we spend less than half a penny trying to beat the disease in the first place. That's just stupid. We've got a lot of stupid in charge. And to allow hundreds of millions of people, or around the world, there's now 1 billion people over 60, to tumble into the diseases of aging, which will cause their families to spend down whatever they had saved, which will cause the children not to be able to go to college, which will cause people not to be able to work longer, but will make other companies and entities some money, I think is wrongheaded. And I think people it's time, I felt like in waking up early this morning, I felt like it's time to take the gloves off. There's something foolish about what we're doing, like existentially foolish and economically foolish and spiritually foolish. And somebody's got to start sounding the alarm.
Absolutely. One other thing I thought was really interesting when you said, why do we define old as 65? It's so arbitrary.
It's a century and a half old definition.
Right. And
very interesting.
I had talked to Jörg Gorunsky, who's a top immunologist, and he said 10 years ago, he measured aging in the immune system, and he would see it starting around 65. Now he doesn't see it happen till around 75 in older adults. Huh. So, maybe 65 just isn't the right cutoff anymore. And we also have to redefine when aging, you actually get old physiologically.
In my view, it's political. In America, at least, and I could speak to the rest of the world, but I'll stick to my home country for a moment. People generally vote their age. About 30% of 30-year-olds vote, about 50% of 50-year-olds vote, but about 70% of 70-year-olds vote. So older people, even though they don't get their full attention in the marketplace, you can't run for a political office without wanting to make older people happy, otherwise they won't vote for you. So I've given talks now to 2.5 million people, and about 500,000 of them have been men and women over 65. And I will often ask, at what age do you think people become old? And I ask them to raise their hand at 65 or 70. And usually they say around 80. But then I say, okay, so you won't mind not getting your old age survivors and disability insurance till you're 80, and they boo me. And so it's a little bit of like people want to be old later, but they want to get their benefits according to the 1880s. And somebody's got to think that through and talk that through and get organizations like AARP to get older people to be a little bit more future minded.
Well, my gosh, Ken, we need to organize a one-day conference that you would lead and start to answer so many questions that we have. And we just can't thank you enough. This has just been amazing. And we have some leading scientists now that are on the cutting edge that are gathering for the next session. So we're going to go over to them, but yep, you got one.
First of all, I want to thank you so much, Zan, for doing this, and thank you for inviting me. But I want to say there's one thing we learned from our kids, and that's virality. And I don't mean physiologic virality, I mean technological virality.
Right.
So I invite everybody watching this to come back in, get this clip, and share it with 10 other people. Because if there's something I said that could cause somebody to think about things better, differently, to create a healthier future, that's what we ought to do with information.
All right, that's the deal. We're on it. Thanks again, Ken. You were terrific.
Terrific.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Saif or Brian, I thought I saw Luigi on the panel. Is he there? Have we gathered our next panel?